city was alive tonight, its streets humming with energy, the distant rumble of traffic echoing like a pulse. Jason stumbled from the pub into the chill of the midnight air, his coat slung over his arm. His friends had long since gone home, but the night still called to him, a reprieve from the pressures of life, a crumbling marriage, unpaid bills, and a job that chipped away at his soul. He pulled his phone from his pocket, its cracked screen blinking to life. 2:47. Jason sighed, stuffing it back as he began walking toward the shortcut through the alleys. Narrow paths, lined with graffiti-scarred walls and scattered trash. Shadows clung to the brickwork, deep and unnerving, but Jason didn't care. He just wanted to get home. It started with footsteps, soft, deliberate, just beyond his line of hearing. Jason paused, turning to glance behind him. Nothing. The alley stretched empty, save for the glisten of rain-soaked concrete. He chuckled nervously to himself and kept walking. The footsteps came again, closer this time. "Hello?" Jason's voice echoed back to him, brittle and uncertain. He picked up his pace, his shoes slapping against the wet ground. A whisper of movement slid across the alley's mouth behind him. He turned quickly, but saw nothing. A trick of the light, perhaps. But then he felt it. An unnatural chill slithered through the air, like the world itself was holding its breath. Jason's skin prickled as he froze in place. A tall, spindly figure emerged from the shadows, gliding silently toward him. Its presence seemed wrong, as though it wasn't walking, but slipping across the earth, untouched by gravity or sound. Jason's heart pounded. "What do you want?" The figure stopped, just on the edge of the light. It was gaunt and emaciated, its skin stretched thin and brittle like aged parchment over sharp, prominent bones. Its face was almost featureless, 2 hollow indentations where eyes should be, and a slit of a mouth that moved unnaturally, twitching and quivering as though unused to forming expressions. "I said, what do you—" The creature moved. In an instant, it was on him, its skeletal hand pressing against his chest like a vice. Pinning him to the wall, Jason gasped, his body writhing in terror. Its face loomed close now, its mouth parting to reveal thin, needle-like teeth, blackened as if from rot. Jason felt his energy draining, a pulling sensation that gnawed at his very core. "No, please," Jason sobbed, tears streaming. "I have kids. Please, I have kids." The creature tilted its head, almost curiously, as though trying to understand the words. Its voice, when it spoke, was like air passing through dry reeds, soft and empty. "I have no hatred for you," it whispered, "but as the lion hunts, so too must I feed. I do not choose this. It is the cycle. It has always been the cycle." Jason's pleas dissolved into choking gasps. The light in his eyes dimmed as the creature fed, its victim's body crumbling to the ground like a puppet with severed strings. The thing stood over him for a moment, silent and still, before turning. It melted into the shadows, disappearing as though it had never been there at all. The hideout. The creature's lair was hidden beneath the earth, an ancient basement swallowed by the city's expansion. Crumbling brick walls loomed over a room scattered with relics, broken statues, rusted chains, and yellowed parchment bearing languages no one spoke anymore. At the center of it all, a cluster of monitors cast a cold, flickering glow over the creature's skeletal form. He sat hunched in a dilapidated chair, staring at the screens. The news played on loop, showing the same stories of politicians, celebrities, and consumer distractions. The election race heats up, with candidates clashing over box office records, broken again by the latest superhero film. Public outrage, as scandals divide communities. The creature, ancient and tired, leaned forward, his hollow sockets staring into the chaos with neither judgment nor emotion. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, as though the air itself strained to carry it. You scurry, distracted by what you were told matters. What flag to wave, what colour to vote for, what voice to follow. Meanwhile, he paused, his brittle fingers tapping the monitor. The lion still hunts, the spider still feeds, and so do I. He sat back, his cracked lips curling faintly in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Survival, he continued, is the only truth, the base of all life. No malice, no morality, just the hunger that drives us all. The monitors buzzed faintly as images flashed across their screens. Wars, celebrations, protests, families at dinner tables. A world oblivious to his existence, spinning forward as it always had. The creature, older than language, older than cities, watched it all with neither contempt nor sympathy. Once they called me Sythras, feeder of the hollow places. He traced the outline of his face, reflected faintly in the screen, a shadow of a shadow. They knew the truth then, but truth becomes myth, and myth fades to dust. Sythras rose, his bones creaking like old wood, and moved to a nearby corner of the room. Here the remains of his last feed lay crumpled. A jacket, a wallet, a photo of Jason with 2 smiling children. Sythras looked at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The monitors flickered again. Outside the city continued its ceaseless motion, unaware of the ancient predator hidden beneath its streets. Sythras stepped back into the shadows of his lair, where the light could not reach, leaving only the hum of the screens behind him. The dark of the lair clung to Sythras like a shroud as he stirred from his rest. Dust rose from the brittle folds of his tattered cloak, the weight of countless centuries pressing against the silence. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened his ancient frame, bones creaking, as if the act of rising had become more burdensome with each passing millennium. His voice rasped through the shadows, soft yet resonant, a whisper that felt older than language itself. And so the cycle continues. Once more must I feed. Once more must the nature of Sythras take from the cycle what the cycle gives. As the lion must hunt, so too must I. He drifted forward, his movements fluid yet unnatural, like smoke carried on the wind. The glow of the monitors flickered behind him, forgotten. Above, the city was stirring once more, its lifeblood, its people, flowing through streets unaware of the predator that hunted among them. The streets of the city. It was a cold, black night, thick with mist that crept through the alleys like a living thing. The hum of neon signs buzzed faintly above the sound of footsteps, hurried, drunken footsteps, cutting through the dead silence. Near the mouth of a narrow alley, the noise of a scuffle shattered the quiet. A man lay curled on the ground, shielding his head, as 3 burly figures stood over him, fists and boots striking without restraint. You think you can talk to her like that, you piece of trash? One of the men bellowed, voice slurred by alcohol. Please, please, the man on the floor cried, blood dripping from his split lip. I didn't say anything, stop. Liar. Another kick landed hard against his ribs. Sythras watched from the veil of darkness nearby, unmoving, silent, like a shadow given shape. His hollow sockets regarded the scene, empty yet perceptive. He heard the pleas for mercy, saw the suffering, but there was no judgment in him, no concern. For what was violence but another cycle, hunter and hunted, predator and prey? Then it came, the scent, blood, fresh, alive. It stirred something deep within him, something primal and unstoppable. The hunger, always lurking beneath the surface, rose like a flood, and the creature's thin lips curled as he inhaled. His mouth twitched, teeth sharp as needles gleaming faintly in the darkness. The man on the ground groaned, glancing up through bloodied eyes, just as the beating stopped. The three attackers froze, confusion flashing across their drunken expressions. Then the first man was flung backward, his body smashing into the alley wall with a sickening crack before crumpling into a heap. The other two staggered in shock, barely registering what had happened before an invisible force swatted them aside like insects. One crashed into a trash bin, another tumbled across the pavement. Limbs sprawled awkwardly. The man on the ground blinked in disbelief, his breathing ragged. What the hell? He pushed himself up onto shaky hands and knees, staring through the haze of pain at the figure standing before him. Sythras loomed there, unnaturally tall and thin, his gaunt frame casting an elongated shadow across the alley. He seemed lifeless, a walking corpse, with skin like aged parchment, stretched over brittle bones. His hollow eyes regarded the man without expression. "Thank you," the man gasped, blood dripping onto the pavement as he forced himself to stand. "Thank you. Those idiots were going to kill me." Sythras tilted his head slowly, his face devoid of empathy, of pity, of anything at all. The man's gratitude meant nothing. All Sythras saw, all he felt, was the hunger. The smell of the man's blood was intoxicating, filling the air with the warmth of life. His fingers twitched as the urges overwhelmed him, the cravings too powerful to resist. Sythras moved, fast, fluid, unstoppable, as his skeletal hand gripped the man by the shoulder, pulling him close. The man's relief turned to horror. "Wait, no, what are you?" The creature's hollow mouth opened, revealing a row of blackened, needle-like teeth. Sythras leaned in, his grip tightening like an iron vice as the man began to struggle. "No," the man screamed, thrashing weakly. "I thought you were helping me." Sythras paused, as if considering the words, before speaking softly, his voice like the whisper of death. "Why would I help my feed?" The man's scream echoed into the night as Sythras fed. His teeth sank deep, and the man's body convulsed as the very essence of his life was drained. His energy, his warmth, his vitality, all consumed. The beating of his heart slowed, faltered, and finally stopped, leaving only a lifeless husk to crumple at the creature's feet. The return to shadows. Sythras rose, wiping the thin streak of blood from his lips with a slow, deliberate motion. The hunger had abated for now, but it would return. It always returned. He turned, leaving the alley in silence, the bodies strewn across the pavement like discarded puppets. The shadows welcomed him as he slipped back into the forgotten places of the city. His ancient hideout awaited, its air thick with the weight of time. Sythras stood once more before the flickering monitors, their glow reflecting faintly in his hollow sockets. The news was the same as always, faces arguing, scandals debated, trivialities that kept the world blind to its basest truth. "Survival," he whispered, sitting down once more. "It is the only constant. The lion hunts, the spider feeds, and so do I." He leaned closer to the screen, watching as the news anchor droned on about chaos, politics, and fame. "You distract yourselves with stories of power, with illusions of meaning. But beneath it all, there is only the hunger, yours and mine." Sythras settled into the chair, the faint hum of the monitors buzzing around him as the cycle, ancient and unbroken, continued. The darkness of the lair was absolute, save for the cold glow of the monitors, their flickering light casting faint, restless shadows across the crumbling walls. Sythras sat motionless in his chair, his hollow sockets staring unblinkingly at the screens before him. War, scandal, politics, fear. The same stories recycled through decades, dressed in new faces and colours. One screen showed images of a burning city. Another displayed the shouting faces of politicians. A third played a segment of celebrity gossip, laughter and forced smiles, echoing in the silence of the room. Sythras spoke softly, his voice no louder than a breath, but it filled the empty space with the weight of eternity. I have lived for centuries. This never changes. Always the same. His thin lips twitched faintly, as if tasting the bitterness of the words. I have watched as they feed you this illusion. Year after year, decade after decade, century after century, they give you this distraction. Your wars, your fears, your stories of right and wrong, while the truth lingers unseen. You are nothing more than prey. His bony fingers tapped slowly on the armrest of his chair, a sound like dry twigs snapping. His hollow gaze never left the screens as they danced with false promises and empty outrage. Then something changed. One of the monitors flickered, its program cutting abruptly to a news broadcast. Sythras stilled, his unnatural stillness becoming absolute, like a predator sensing movement in the brush. The screen now displayed a man standing before a familiar alleyway, dimly lit police lights flashing behind him. The man, mid-40s, unshaven and wide-eyed, gripped the microphone as though it were his lifeline. I know what I saw. The man's voice trembled with both fear and excitement. The authorities don't believe me, but I saw it with my own eyes. It wasn't human. It was something else. A creature. A monster. The broadcast cut to shaky phone footage. The grainy image showed glimpses of something tall and shadowy in the corner of the alley, a figure with unnaturally thin limbs and a hollow, faceless visage. Its movements too quick to be human. The camera shook violently, and then the screen went dark. The man on the TV returned, his expression more resolute. I've heard the stories, the myths about vampires. For years, people have dismissed them, laughed them off. But I have proof now. Proof that something ancient, something predatory is walking among us. Sythras leaned forward slightly, a faint creaking of his old chair breaking the silence. His hollow sockets narrowed in interest, a flicker of something, not quite emotion, but close, passing over his ancient features. I have spent the last day gathering evidence. The man continued, holding up a bloodied scrap of clothing, Jason's jacket, torn and familiar. And I will not stop here. I am tracking this creature to prove it exists. I will find it. I will expose it to the world. The man's voice rose with conviction. To the thing that did this, I know you're out there. I will find you. The monitor's glow reflected in Sythras' gaunt face as he sat perfectly still, the words hanging in the air like smoke, and then, for the first time in centuries, his lips moved. A faint, unnatural sound echoed through the room. A smile. It was barely perceptible. The curl of those cracked lips, but it was there. Sythras spoke, his voice carrying an edge it had not held in countless years, as if something long dormant had stirred deep within him. Then come, he whispered softly, his words lingering like a hiss in the dark. Come find Sythras. The monitors buzzed faintly, their light flickering across his ancient, withered face. And in the silence of the room, Sythras sat back once more, that faint, unsettling smile lingering as the news anchor's voice droned on. For the first time in centuries, the predator felt a flicker of anticipation. Let us see, Sythras murmured to the empty room. If the hunter knows he is prey. The small apartment was dim, lit only by the glow of a flickering computer screen. Papers were strewn across the desk, handwritten notes, scrawled with desperate theories, ancient symbols, and frantically circled words like vampire, immortal, and Sythras. The man from the television sat hunched over the chaos, tapping away at his keyboard with trembling fingers. His name was David Kress, and he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed, dark circles bruising his pale skin. A half-empty coffee cup sat forgotten next to his shaking hand as he muttered to himself, "I will find you. I must find you." He reached for a small, framed photograph, propped against his monitor. It showed a little girl with a wide, fragile smile, her head bald from treatments, an IV tube snaking from her arm. David's voice broke as he whispered to the photo. "Stage 4 now. They say weeks at most. I can't let you go. I can't." A buzzing sound filled the air, the single bulb above him flickering, casting stuttering shadows across the room. David ignored it, his eyes fixed on the photo. "I've tried everything. Everything. They can't help you. They won't help you." The buzzing grew louder, the light flaring brighter and brighter until... Pop! The bulb exploded in a burst of glass and sparks, plunging the room into darkness. David jumped, his heart hammering as he fumbled for the desk lamp. It refused to turn on. A new sound drifted through the room, a low hum, like the groaning of an ancient wind moving through unseen cracks. Slowly, impossibly, the darkness deepened. Not the absence of light, but a presence of something else. It pooled in the corners, thick and heavy, and moved. David froze, the air turning icy as the shadows drained what little light remained. And then he saw it. A figure emerged, tall, thin, and impossibly dark. It was as if the creature swallowed the light around it, a void given shape. The shadows clung to its form, trailing like tattered smoke. Its hollow sockets gleamed faintly, reflecting nothing. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sythras stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate. When he spoke, his voice carried no malice, only an ancient, dispassionate authority. "So," he whispered, "you seek Sythras. How interesting." David stumbled back, his chair scraping against the floor. Sythras tilted his head, his hollow sockets fixed on the trembling man. "Tell me, has the gazelle ever sought out the lion? Has the fly looked to converse with the spider?" The creature's lips curled faintly, almost in mockery. "Yet here you are, thinking you hunt the hunter." David shook his head frantically, his voice trembling. I don't hunt you, I swear. I just..." Sythras cut him off with a slow, fluid step forward. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against David's chest as the creature loomed over him. "For centuries," Sythras murmured, "I have preyed on your kind, and yet my fill is hardly noticed in the grand scheme of what you do to each other." He gestured toward the lifeless screens. "Your wars, your man-made diseases, your people poisoning themselves willingly every day. I am insignificant compared to your self-destruction." Sythras leaned closer, his skeletal frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow David whole. "And yet you seek out Sythras. Then let Sythras shorten your journey." The creature's hand shot forward, a claw-like grip closing around David's collar. The man let out a strangled cry, but in his desperation, he fumbled for the photograph, thrusting it toward the monster's face. "Please," David gasped. "Master, please." The word hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. Sythras stilled. David, panting, held the photo higher. "She will die. My daughter. Look at her. She's all I have. My life means nothing to me." Sythras's grip slackened, just slightly. He tilted his head, his hollow gaze shifting to the photograph. For the first time in untold years, something stirred within him, not compassion, but curiosity. "You call me master," Sythras said softly, his voice a dry whisper. "None have spoken that word to me in an age. I have dwelled in shadow, hidden from your world and its illusions, and yet you have sought out Sythras." David nodded frantically, his tears falling onto the photo. "I have. I know the truth. I know what they hide. Our leaders, our healers, our society. They lie to us. They feed us fear. They use our own duty, our own need for approval against us. They distract us with illusions, religion, politics, greed, while we die. But you..." David looked up, trembling but resolute. "You hide nothing. You are the hunter. We are the prey. I accept that, but you do not lie. I trust you more than them." Sythras stared at him, unmoving. "I've tried everything," David continued, his voice cracking. "I've lied. I've stolen. I've cheated. Anything to save her. But nothing has worked. No amount of money or science can help her. I know you do not care. You are right to see me as nothing. But I offer you this, Master. I offer you my life." He dropped to his knees, holding the photo out with both hands. "Take me. Feed on me. But save her. I beg of you." The room fell deathly silent. Sythras' head tilted once more, his hollow sockets fixed on the man. Slowly he extended a hand and took the photograph, holding it between his thin, clawed fingers. He stared at it, his expression unreadable. "Tell me," Sythras said, his voice a soft, hollow murmur. "Why should I help you? You are but a fly in my web." David looked up, tears streaming down his face. Because you are honest. You are the truth. And I have nothing left but my truth. Please." The faintest sound, something almost like a sigh, escaped Sythras as he looked once more at the photograph. For the briefest of moments, the shadows seemed to flicker. Then, without warning, Sythras leaned in. David's eyes widened in horror as the creature's sharp teeth parted. Wait! But Sythras' grip was unrelenting. The man's scream was brief, swallowed by the shadows. The sun rose weakly over the city, pale light seeping into David Kress's apartment. The door remained locked, the curtains drawn. Inside, David's body sat slumped in his chair, his eyes closed as though he had simply fallen asleep. There were no signs of struggle, no wounds, nothing to suggest the violence that had occurred. Yet David's skin was pale, his lips colourless, his body empty of life. On the desk, beside his crumpled notes and computer, the photograph of a little girl remained untouched, and in the silence of the room, it seemed as though the shadows lingered just a little longer before retreating into the corners, leaving behind nothing but the faint hum of a lifeless monitor. The hospital room was a storm of chaos. Monitors screamed their warnings in shrill beeps, a relentless alarm that sent shivers through every nurse and doctor crowded around the small bed. Ella, just 8 years old, lay still as her shallow breathing wheezed softly through an oxygen mask. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, her frail chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. Her mother, Sarah Kress, clutched her child's hand, her knuckles white. "Please!" she cried, her voice raw and broken. "Why won't she wake up? Why?" A doctor gently touched her shoulder. His expression was carefully practiced, cold, professional sympathy hiding the defeat in his eyes. "Mrs. Kress, I'm sorry. We did everything we could. Her body is failing. It's..." "No," Sarah screamed, shoving the doctor's hand away. "You're lying. Do something." The nurses exchanged helpless glances, their faces drawn in grief. The steady rhythm of Ella's heartbeat on the monitor began to slow, each beep stretching longer apart. The lights in the room dimmed inexplicably, flickering and buzzing faintly as though something unseen were draining their energy. The doctor swallowed hard, his voice soft as he murmured, "It's time. I'm so sorry." Sarah collapsed over her daughter's motionless body, sobbing into the sheets. Ella's breaths were shallow now, her small chest barely moving at all. The monitors slowed further. Beep, beep, beep. Then the lights exploded. Glass shattered with a deafening crash, sparks cascading like tiny stars before vanishing into the sudden, suffocating darkness. The room fell silent. The machines cut out, their screens blinking to black. From the far corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest, something moved. A figure stepped forward, tall and thin, wrapped in darkness that seemed to swallow the light around it. The shadows clung to it, trailing like smoke, as if the thing itself was part of the void. Sythras emerged, his hollow sockets fixed on the girl lying in the bed, his movements unnaturally slow, deliberate. The doctors and nurses froze, unable to speak, paralyzed by the primal terror that radiated from the figure. Sarah's head shot up, her tear-streaked face twisting in horror. "Get away from her!" she shrieked, lunging toward Sythras, like a mother lion protecting her cub. Sythras extended one skeletal hand and raised a single finger to his cracked lips. Shh! The sound carried like a breeze of death through the room, and Sarah froze mid-step, her breath hitching. "I was sent," Sythras said softly, his voice hollow and ancient, resonating as though from a cavernous abyss. "The one you called David has made a bargain, and I always honor the deal of my loyal servants." Sarah stared at him, her trembling hand covering her mouth. "David," she whispered. Sythras drifted forward, approaching the bed. The girl's eyes fluttered weakly, and with a monumental effort, she managed to open one. For a moment, she stared up at the figure looming over her, a dark silhouette against the fragmented light. Sythras leaned in, his skeletal hand hovering over her face. "He has paid," he whispered. "I now deliver." Sarah tried to scream, to move, but she could only watch in stunned disbelief as Sythras lowered his hand over Ella's mouth. From his withered palm, a dark shadow began to pour forth, tendrils of black mist seeping into the girl's fragile body. Ella's small frame convulsed violently, her limbs jerking as if unseen hands were pulling at her. Her monitors, though dead, began to hum faintly with energy. The doctors stepped back, their expressions shifting from terror to awe as the impossible unfolded before them. And then it stopped. Ella fell still, her chest silent. The room hung in perfect quiet, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Sythras straightened, drifting backward, his form blending into the shadows once more. And then Ella sat up. Sarah gasped, tears spilling down her face as she threw her arms around her daughter. Ella, my baby, you're alive, you're alive." The doctors hesitated, staring in disbelief as Ella moved. One of them rushed forward, stammering, "This is impossible. She shouldn't even be able to sit up. Her vitals." Ella turned to face him. Her expression was calm, too calm. "Not because of you," she said softly, "but because of my daddy." Before the doctor could react, Ella's small body moved with unnatural speed. She lunged at the doctor's neck, her teeth sinking deep into his flesh. Blood sprayed across the white hospital walls as the man crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Sarah screamed, stumbling backward as her daughter, her frail dying child, turned to face her. Ella's eyes were no longer the soft brown Sarah knew. They were black, endless and hollow, like the void itself. From the darkened corner of the room, where the shadows still writhed unnaturally, a hand emerged. Thin and clawed, it reached toward the girl as a voice echoed softly through the stillness. "Come, my child. This world of illusion is no longer for you." Ella stood, her movements fluid. She drifted toward the corner of the room, her small figure swallowed by the shadows. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. Her gaze found her mother, tears glistening in Sarah's eyes. "Goodbye, Mummy," Ella said softly, her voice strangely serene. "Thank you for trying so hard. Daddy gave his life so I could step out of this illusion, but I must go now. Know that I still exist, and I am pain-free." The shadows consumed her, and she was gone. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing, her cries echoing through the ruined, blood-stained room. The lights flickered faintly, struggling to return, but the shadows lingered in the corners, dark, ancient, and hungry. And somewhere deep within them, Sythras smiled.